We're live. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Clee Jackson, president of the Greater Grand Rapids branch of the NAACP. And we want to thank everyone who's tuning in tonight again to this very important conversation that we've been hosting. I believe this is part 6 of a series that we are calling COVID-19 Uncovered. And so we really wanted to do this in order to make sure that community is receiving information with respect to all things COVID, and especially with the execution of the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. And we've heard today that Johnson & Johnson is, I believe, on the cusp of getting an EUA, emergency use authorization to roll to start to distribute their vaccine. So we wanted to make sure that we were out here sharing information to community. So all of you who have been watching these live streams can make informed decisions. And that also that you will have access to experts in a variety of different areas and fields, and that can answer questions, and some questions, some tough questions, and just share their knowledge and those sort of things. So we are super excited tonight to have Dr. Sandhya Hutchins. And Dr. Hutchins is a preventative medicine physician practicing for the past 34 years in the federal and academic settings. She is board certified in that medical specialty by the American Board of Preventative Medicine, and has been a fellow of the American College of Preventive Medicine for several decades, Currently, she is the director of the Public Health and Preventative Medicine Residency Program at Morehouse School of Medicine, and professor in the Department of Community Health and Preventative Medicine. Dr. Hutchins recently retired. As we were talking early, she said 30 years. She logged 30 years in 2017 from the U.S. Public Health Service in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a captain or medical director after, again, more than 30 years of service in preventing and controlling infectious diseases through vaccination, directing public health and emergency preparedness in response to some of the most vulnerable populations that we in society, I would say, and with the intent of advancing health equity. During her CDC service, she also held several leadership positions and received numerous honors and awards, and authored approximately 90 peer-reviewed publications. So we welcome you, Dr. Hutchins.
Thank you.
And also, we're super excited to have another guest on, Dr. Ed Staniszewski. And Ed is no stranger to the area of science and pharmaceuticals. He was the associate director at Zoetis, which is formerly Pfizer Animal Health in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He also did some private consultant work in clinical monitoring and clinical investigation and technical writing. Also, he was a regulatory science coordinator as well for Monsanto company in St. Louis, Missouri. Should have worn my other glasses this evening. He was a researcher and science research, senior researcher in sciences at Pharmacia in Upjohn in Kalamazoo. And he also was a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Animal Sciences at Purdue University. He has a PhD from Michigan State University and MS from Michigan State University. You love Michigan State University. And a BS from the University of Massachusetts. And so welcome, and I'll just call you Ed, and
that'll be fine. Thank you.
Welcome, and again, thanks for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
So, yeah. So, Dr. Hutchins. So I went through your bio, and now you're a professor and practitioner at the Morehouse School of Medicine. Can you tell us a little bit of what that involves there, your role there?
Well, my role is the professor in the Department of Community Health and Preventive Medicine, and also the director of the Public Health and Preventive Medicine Residency Program. And what I do in that role, and both roles, is really help educate the medical students as a professor, but also, and the residents, but also oversee the residency program to ensure that when the physicians graduate from our residency training program, they are competent to practice public health and preventive medicine, but also that they are leaders in advancing health equity in communities and at the national level, and even in some circumstances at the global level.
Okay.
Would you like me to go on and talk a little bit more about?
No, that's it. That's awesome. That's great. Just wanted our audience to get a little background from you in terms of specifically your role at Morehouse School of Medicine. Also, what is your opinion with respect to the safety of both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines? There's been a lot of conversation around how fast these vaccines were, developed, not only developed, but also are, on the market. And so, what's your perspective with respect to the safety of both of these current vaccines?
Well, my perspective is grounded in the science, and it reflects the Food and Drug Administration's review of the testing in tens and thousands of people. Now, I know that what has been said is that the development of these candidate vaccines was under Operation Warp Speed. But the only thing that was really of warp speed was the simultaneous manufacturing of the vaccines while they're being tested. Because it took some time to do that, and I'm sure Dr. Selewski will be able to describe that a little bit more. There wasn't any cutting corners in terms of testing, and the phases of testing are 3 phases. The first phase is in humans, and Dr. Selewski might want to talk about the preclinical or the pre-human testing that goes on before you test these vaccines in humans. So when you get to humans, us, then we're really talking about looking first at safety, and that's a phase 1 study in general. And the next phase is testing for whether that vaccine elicits or induces an immune response, your immune response. Right. And then the last phase is testing to determine whether that immune response protects you from the disease, the illness, or severe illness like hospitalization or even death. So that's what goes on in terms of testing of the vaccines. And again, the first phase is the safety of the vaccine, but throughout the 3 phases, testing about and looking at safety is very important. And
Mm.
so, again, tens and thousands of people were tested. And because I've participated in doing vaccine research in the past, and that's before I joined CDC, during my training as a public health preventive medicine resident, I had the great opportunity to be a vaccine researcher. And so I'm very familiar with all these different phases and have participated in those kinds of trials as a researcher. So then, after you finish those phases and you look at safety, these manufacturers, Pfizer and Moderna, presented the data that they had collected from these trials to the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. And then the FDA reviewed it and said, okay, the safety and the efficacy are good for emergency use authorization approval. And that's why those vaccines are available. So the fact is that the manufacturing of the vaccines were done at the same time as the testing. So then the vaccines were immediately available once the emergency use authorization approval was given by the FDA.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ed, when I think Sanja mentioned, testing that these vaccines were during the clinical trials tested in humans. You know of any or have any information, because that was a question I think that we received when they start these clinical trials, right? Do they typically do any or start the testing or these trials in animals, or were these, these two vaccines only done with human subjects?
No, that's part of the FDA review process. Is both Pfizer and Moderna does animal testing, which provides the background information to move on. And they did. It's usually in at least two species. In this case, it was primates and mice. And there was a model to, again, both look at preliminary safety and efficacy. I'd also like to add at this point about the speed that this moved ahead. Lost in a lot of the reports are that, well, as you're aware, both Pfizer and Moderna used messenger RNA technology, which is a way of saying that they were able to focus in a specific portion of the virus to generate antigens. And the way that moved so quickly is that China, when they first isolated the virus, they sequenced it. And so we knew the genetic sequence of that. And what they did from there is they published it worldwide, which to me kind of says that they knew they were going so they put this out there. And so the companies basically had the playbook to work from to generate their products. So they knew exactly the sequence that they had to target. And so that, that chopped months off the process.
And then the other part is that there's just a lot of disease in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
So the vaccine trials could determine once their participants were vaccinated or not, because these studies, they have some people who are not vaccinated, and they compare, who gets disease and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. And because there was so much disease, and still is, in our communities, they were able to enroll and to finish their trials in a good time.
Yeah, and I think folks, that's, there's been a lot of conversation, and quite honestly, we know that and I want to, and either of you could answer this question, the next question. I want to kind of talk about what is, when you look at the difference from FDA approval versus an emergency use authorization, emergency use authorization. What is the difference in terms of that process? I also know that, when you are pursuing FDA approval, it's my understanding that that could actually take years to get, right? So I want to just kind of clarify for folks, because we know that either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine has been FDA approved. And so I want to kind of identify or discuss what's the difference, right? The other piece, Dr. Or Ed, when you look at, you've done a lot of work in talking about this, and as we're talking about the safety and the rollout and the efficacy, you've done, it looks like, a lot of work in clinical monitoring. So exactly what is that? And then how did that play into these two vaccines, or how will it play?
Yeah, so a clinical monitor is usually associated with the sponsor company, for instance, in this case, Pfizer or Moderna. And their responsibility is to assure that the protocol that was approved by FDA is followed, and the data are collected according to the protocol. And the clinical monitor is always in communication with the investigators, and the investigators are the clinicians, sometimes associated with the university, sometimes the hospital, but they're the ones that are actually enrolling patients. And so what the monitor does is, meets with the investigators, trains them as needed to collect the data according to the protocol. And also, it's very important that if any safety issues do arise during conduct of the study, that they are communicated right away to the monitor, to the company. So there were no corners cut on this. It's just that, as Dr. Hutchins said earlier, several things were done at the same time. And so, in terms of the emergency use authorization, that's, as the name states, it's put in place during an emergency, which we are in with the COVID pandemic. And so what that means is they can take the data available, which is a full data package. I mean, it was expedited in review, both by FDA and probably what Johnson & Johnson is going through right now is FDA shares those data with outside experts, and they review the data also, and both Pfizer and Moderna went through that back in December. So, there are a lot of eyes looking at the data package and assuring the safety and efficacy. So anyway, in a emergency use authorization, FDA can, first of all, the company will request that, and FDA will, after review by the experts, make a determination whether there is enough data here to outweigh any risks by expediting, putting it out for use. And risks are death. So it's a serious situation. And again, it has been reviewed by a plethora of experts, for both that it works and that it's safe.
And what I want to do is add that the reason why they were able to manufacture the vaccines at the same time of testing is because the federal government paid for the manufacturing of the vaccine. And you might have heard recently in the media that President Biden has work with the manufacturers to pay for 200 million doses or more so that 200 million people would be able to be vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that nuance because typically the manufacturers are the ones that pay for the manufacturing of the vaccine. But
Right.
because this is a pandemic, a worldwide epidemic, and there's a lot of disease and a lot of illness and hospitalizations and death, that this is what we call a major public health emergency. And the use of the emergency use authorization is critical in this kind of situation. So you weigh the public health problem against any safety profile of the
Mm-hmm.
vaccine, and they see and they found that the FDA, that is, found that the benefit outweighed the risk. And what
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing now at the population level is decreases in the number of cases as well as the number of hospitalizations and deaths. And the more people that get vaccinated, because these two vaccines are highly efficacious in its measure of effectiveness, meaning that 94 to 95% of people who get the vaccine will develop a protective immunologic response.
Mm. Yeah, Sandra, a part of your role is my understanding, is to, I guess I'll put it this way, monitoring to improve vaccination confidence, right? So how does that look and how does that work? Because it's interesting because I think that's very intriguing to me because, again, the word on the street is that, yeah, especially when it comes to the Black community and folks who identify with other communities of color, there is this, alleged hesitancy to want to take either of the vaccinations. So that's very interesting when I saw that in this monitoring to improve vaccination confidence. How does that look or work?
Right. There are people who are hesitant. When I interact with my own patients and educate these preventive medicine residents on how, the information about the vaccine efficacy and safety, so that they can communicate that to their patients. And in that context is the context in which I actually just, monitor, if you will, vaccine hesitancy and confidence. We know that vaccine hesitancy is an issue. In my social life, which is all virtual now, with my church, my faith-based organization, my alumni organizations, my sorority, and so forth, I encounter a lot of different people who are interested in knowing about these vaccines. And they also are interested in knowing about the safety. I mean, that's their major concern. They know that we're having a really bad pandemic, but they're concerned about the safety of the vaccine. So not only in my role as a, let's say, professor and teaching medical students and graduate medical education through the physician who are training in the public health preventive medicine residency program, I also interact with my family members, friends, colleagues, everyone is asking about these questions. So I make sure that I'm up to date in the areas so that I can help people understand the safety process that goes into examining, the vaccines.
Yeah, I'm going to bounce to one question that we have in the comments, and one of the viewers is asking, I think this is Nicole Thompson, she's asking, are the vaccines different? And I would add to that as well is my understanding when you sign up to get vaccinated, you're kind of going in blind. Is that true? You really don't know which vaccine that you will get. And what is, if that's true, what's the reason behind that? You want to take that, Ed, coming from the pharmaceutical field?
Yeah, it's as I understand it. Well, there are 2 vaccines out there, soon possibly to be 3 that are available, and depending on the processes that are set up, they're being diverted to different routes. So, for instance, in this general area, if I go to one clinic, I know that they're predominantly giving one of the vaccines. Another clinic a few miles away is predominantly giving another one. But and full disclosure, as you said earlier, I did work for Pfizer. So they're kind of the home team for me. But in my particular case, I'm on several lists when I become available to receive a vaccine, and the first one that comes available, that's the one I'm going to take because they all work.
And let me just add to that by saying that these 2 vaccines are made very similarly compared to the other vaccines down the pike. They are made of lipid nanoparticles that cover the mRNA, the genetic material of the virus, and that codes for the proteins, the outer coat of the proteins that elicits the immune response. They have a similar ingredients. And so the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which makes recommendations for the nation once FDA approves a vaccine, they have recommendations that they've published, and they're on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's website. And they see these vaccines essentially as equivalent, because if you have 94 to 95% efficacy and you have a similar safety profile, then they're essentially equivalent.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the ingredients, because that's a question that I have, and a lot of people are asking exactly what's in these vaccines. Like, what are the ingredients in these vaccines? And can either of you can speak to that if you want to talk about that a little bit. And I will say before you respond, we are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan has developed a what's called a vaccine resource guide, and it really has a ton of information, but it's a pretty quick read, and that's one of the areas or things that it addresses in terms of the ingredients in these vaccines. And so we'll be distributing that in partnership with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan to community organizations and partners. And so look forward to seeing that. And we'll probably end up putting it on our website, which is NAACPGR.com, as so anyone can always go there and access that resource guide. But either you can take that question about the ingredients, because and I think that is an important question, because again, when you talk about hesitancy, people think about, and rightfully so, well, what's in these vaccines, and so if you could speak to that briefly, that'd be great. And either of you could take it.
Okay. Ed, do you want to speak to that, or you want me to speak to that?
Well,
I'm
if you would.
trying to go to the CDC website, because it is on the CDC website.
Yeah.
what is available to the public in terms of what's available, because some people have allergies to different ingredients of the vaccine. And if they do have an allergy that's of a severe nature, requiring medical treatment, then they should not get that vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it's rare. It's rare that people have these allergies. So it's important to know what is in the vaccine. And again, it's available on the CDC website. And I'm trying to pull it up now. So Ed, would you like to say anything about the different ingredients?
Actually, I'm really not that familiar with the formulations of the vaccines. Other than I'll just add to the it is a rare occurrence, and I believe that all clinics that are dispensing the vaccine are still requiring the recipients to basically stay around for at least 15 minutes to see if there is an allergic reaction.
Right, and you could be treated if you do have an allergic reaction. But again, if you know ahead of time that you may be allergic to different components of the vaccine, and that you have this anaphylactic severe reaction, then it is a contraindication to getting that vaccine.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's critically important as well, if you have a primary care physician, to always consult with your physician and know if you are have certain risk factors that that might cause you to having a significant or severe adverse reaction to either of the vaccines. So I would always recommend to anyone to always consult with your physician prior to taking the vaccines. And I think that question really comes from this space. There's been a lot of conversation about, does the vaccine contain the virus? So I think really that's where that question comes from. And we know that it does not, but it's, my understanding, again, we'll be putting that resource guide. There are a variety of different fats, which, I guess the scientific name is lipids, and then some different salines and different things like that is what my research has turned up so far with respect to that. But that information actually that's pulled directly, and Sonia is absolutely correct, from the CDC's website. It's probably information as well from our local health department, specifically related to the ingredients in the vaccine. And so a legitimate question, people want to know.
And thank you for making sure that people work with their primary care physician, their physicians, to go over the risks and the benefits, and to make sure that they understand that you always have the resources of your physician, your primary care physician, your specialist. They should all have some information about this as well.
Yeah, and it's critically important. That's why it's so important to have that relationship with your primary care physician. It is critically important, and I would encourage folks, if you actually don't have it or haven't selected a primary care physician, that you really want to make sure you do that as quickly as possible as well. And that's just not for this, for this period in time, but it's for this period and moving forward. And in full disclosure, I actually have worked in the healthcare industry my entire career, and so my other gig is with, and that pays me, is with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. And so I've been with the Blues for 25 years. I've worked both on the provider side for 15 years, and then also actually for 10 years, and then transitioned over to the community and civic relations side for the last 10, 11 years. And so that was my business, was, to, recruit physicians and monitor utilization and really encourage our members about the importance of always having that relationship with a primary care physician. And so again, I cannot look that up anymore, but that is absolutely critically important. And so, as we know, Ed, I think I was going to ask you, but this is probably not a relevant question, because this has come, would you recommend a certain vaccine to certain people, or, one of these vaccines? But if you don't really know, I think fundamentally, we don't know which vaccine we might get, right? When we go to a vaccination site or clinic. But I think also when we look at the efficacy, it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of both the Pfizer and Moderna, the efficacy of these is, in terms of it's pretty much the same. They pretty much line up the same. Now, there is some talk we heard with the announcement of the Johnson & Johnson that the efficacy, or I should say the protection variable, is about maybe 66% or in the high 60s with the Johnson & Johnson, but it's one shot. It doesn't have to be stored at these extreme cold temperatures, is my understanding as well. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Ed, or.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get hung up on the percentages of the efficacy. I mean, these are studies. They're based on thousands of people, and that's the number they came up with at the end. Whether it was 66 or 95, basically they both work. And to put it in perspective, generally, with our annual flu shot, if they have 50% efficacy, that's that's satisfactory. And so I don't want to get I don't think people should get hung up on the exact percentages. If you run the study again, it's probably going to change a few numbers, and actually both of those, all three studies were run on different populations, so there's going to be some variability. Again, the bottom line is they all work, and all the data I've seen in terms of preventing hospitalizations and severe illness, they're approaching 100% from that aspect. So, again, they work.
Right. So, and I want to kind of, move into this question that's in from one of our viewers, Shirley Moody. She's asking, and I would like to know why it is that only 3.9% of African Americans have received the vaccinations here in Michigan, Grand Rapids, and 45% of white Americans have received the vaccination for the Corona-19 virus. And why is it that we know African Americans have a lot of underlying health conditions? Why did the CDC do the rollout and did not put them with the? Okay, so I'm going to stop that question right there, because I'd asked, we had Dr. Shanna Stoddard from Rhodes College and another emergency medical physician, and Dr. Stoddard, Shanna, is a biochemist. And so I asked both of them the question, and I'll ask you this because I think that's what this Shirley Moody's getting at the heart of this, because we know that there are the tiers in terms of how these vaccines are rolled out and who gets first. Now it's currently 65 and older, and essential workers, healthcare workers, and other workers, et cetera. But we know that disproportionately, Black and brown people have succumbed to this virus. And so I think her question is, why aren't we at the top of the list in this first rollout? And I know either you can speak to that, and or I guess the other question is, in your opinion, should African Americans and other people of color be at the top of this list, since there's such a disparity with respect to death rates?
Okay, well, I can start and to answer the question as it relates to the priority list. From a population perspective, you also have to consider those who are at increased risk of exposure. So the very first people on the top of the list are healthcare workers who come in contact with people who might be ill.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thinks that's fair. There are public health interventions that are being recommended for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those include wearing a mask, if you're out in public, watching your distance, being 6 feet away from other people, at least 6 feet away, washing your hands frequently, and not being in large crowds. So if you're staying home, if you have the opportunity to stay home, and we know there's a number of essential workers who are at increased risk for exposure too, but those who are taking care of ill patients are at greatest risk, and those who are doing the housekeeping in the hospitals and coming in contact, and those who are transporting patients. So that's very clear. And then not only are those at increased risk for the first group, also those who are older adults, 75 and older, CDC recommended as being the first priority as well, because many states, most of the cases were occurring in older adults in nursing homes. So they are included. Then the next phase are essential workers and other high-risk populations. So these include adults 65 and older, and then those with underlying health conditions and so on. So both exposure and risk of severe disease were considered in the prioritization scheme that CDC put together, which is based on the data and epidemiology of the COVID-19 disease. Now, the issue about equitable vaccine access is a real issue, and it shines a light clearly on the health inequities in this country that have been going on for quite some time. And so that's where we are. And what has to be done? It has to be intentional to rectify it. And part of it is showing and monitoring the access. And the Kaiser Family Foundation has, they regularly monitor and have on their website the disparities in vaccine access by race and ethnicity. So we should continue to follow that. And then, so they summarize it for the whole nation. And then sometimes you have to go to the state's website to see that. So it's not only here in Michigan, it's in other states throughout the United States that this is occurring, that there's disparities for African Americans and other populations of color in receiving the vaccine. We know we have a lot of healthcare workers who are, populations of color who should have gotten the vaccine by now, but there are a lot of people who haven't. And the same is true for those who are living in long-term care facilities like nursing homes. CDC had a 3-day meeting. Well, yeah, a 3-day meeting that ended yesterday. That included looking at what might be the best practices and promising practices for
Right.
vaccinating the high-risk populations, including, those of color. So I just wanted to let you know about that. If you didn't know that there was this national forum in which there was a lot of exchange of ideas and promising practices to reach.
Yeah, that's
communities of
actually,
color.
thank you for sharing that. That's really good to know because as you said, and I think you so eloquently put it, is that the reality is that there has always been desperate impact when it comes to the healthcare industry overall. And when you look at equitable access to healthcare, and when I say access, meaning efficient, affordable, quality healthcare, and then also access to providers who actually have a certain level of cultural context, right? And so and so we've dealt with that. I know that I in Fulton County, where you are, Sandra, I know Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has talked about the disparity that it seems like, same thing, I guess, here in Michigan, that exists when it comes to the number of, when you look at Black folks compared to white folks who's receiving the vaccine. So I think overall, we just have to continually monitor that and monitor where those vaccines, how many doses are being distributed to certain communities, and especially as some would say high risk communities as well. And then also I would say to those individuals, again, it's about choice, who actually in this first tier of people who are eligible to get it. When these vaccine clinics are held and hosted, it's very important for us to share that information and make sure those individuals, our family, our friends, our loved ones who fall into these categories right now, if those individuals want to get it, that we make sure they get to these places to get that vaccine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a great need. For example, Morehouse has vaccinated way over 1,000 people doing their community outreach clinics on the weekend, but they have a waiting list of 8,000 people who want to get the vaccine and they are eligible for the vaccine. So this is the kind of challenges that we're facing in terms of the vaccine supply and distribution. But yeah, and the other piece of that is, now the pharmaceuticals are getting the vaccine. Community health centers that are federally qualified community health centers are getting the vaccines directly under this administration. But they're also the other piece is with the private providers in the community who are trusted by by their patients. It varies across the country how well they're getting access to the vaccine to give it to their patients. So we know that we have a limited supply right now, but it's increasing every day. And soon we'll have, the J&J vaccine or the Janssen vaccine. We're going to hear from the FDA tomorrow advisory committee on what they think about their application for emergency use authorization.
Yeah.
So this is exciting that there's another vaccine on the horizon, and there are others in the pipeline. We forgot about AstraZeneca. That's the other vaccine that's being used in Europe now. So, so we're looking forward to more vaccines so that the supply increases. But at the same time, we want to make sure that those who are eligible don't experience those inequities in gaining access to the vaccine in
Yeah,
their communities.
I agree. I agree. And Ed, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I guess what I can add is it's sort of been said just a minute ago, but as the supplies do increase, I would urge anyone watching this webcast right now to reach out to friends and relatives that may not have access to the proper technology, or just needs the information, but reach out to them and see if they do fall into one of the priority categories, and if they do wish to get the vaccine, help them along with that process.
Mhm.
Yeah, I want to go to this question, and either you could chime in on this. Douglas Green is asking, other than TV, what is being done to get the message out to the minorities communities about where the vaccine can be taken in if they have questions or etc. So that's one of the things too, that it seems like it hasn't really been and again, this is no indictment, with respect to anyone, but when I think about, typically getting the word out about any event, you typically see this marketing campaign, you see some level of promotions, right?
Mhm.
A flyer so people can share that information. I'm not seeing a lot of that happen. I know that I'm actually working to help launch a vaccine clinic in Ben Harbor, which is south of here, in the next week, in partnership with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan and Meyer. And so, one of the things that we always talk a lot about is developing that promotional piece, right? Because people can't come if they don't know what's happening.
Mhm.
And so I'm seeing some other vaccine clinics that I don't see this marketing, or and maybe that's just me, but because I get calls, the NAACP gets calls from organizations saying, hey, can you help spread the word? And when I ask for a specific promotional piece, it's like they don't have that. So, but that's a good question, Doug. I don't know if either Sandra or Ed, if you want to respond to that.
It's been my observation that if you don't have broadband, you're kind of left out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know in Fulton County, they do have a number to call, but you have to be able to gain access to their website. And then there's press releases. Sometimes there's coverage, media coverage of the governor and our state health director.
Mm-hmm.
So, they do have press conferences from time to time. So if you're watching the television, you might be able to catch that. But for the the Black African American community, you really need to be on radio a lot in order to get the word out to people. And I've not heard of that either. And maybe because the supply is still limited, and we're still in the
Yeah,
1A
but
phase priority group. I'm
but
not sure, but you're absolutely right, Clea, that yeah.
the flip side of that is, I don't know if it's an issue of the supply being limited, because what I've been hearing is, like we've hosted there's a church, one of the oldest historical churches in the city of Grand Rapids, that's been hosting probably 3 or 4 vaccine clinics.
Mm.
And it seems like it's, been a struggle for them to fill the limited supply that they're getting, right? And so it is, and their supply has been limited. When you compare with the doses that they're getting, it could be, the first dose, the number of doses they got was honestly 250 doses. But when you look at 10 miles from here, in a suburban area, they got 11,000 doses. And so, as I say, make that make sense, right? But I think that I don't know if it's the supply because still with even, and so I understand that they've increased. I think they've had the last number that I heard, I think New Hope had was like 800 doses, right, this past week. But when I got a call to say, hey, we need to, get this information out and they were maybe halfway filled. But again, I think the other piece with that, we got that call at the 23rd hour, right? So like literally the day before, and then you have to register. So you got to go and register as well. And so, and it's like, guys, come on, we got to do better than this. And we push it out. We have a major communication portal that we can push that information out. So I just say, I've made recommendations to the powers to be in terms of, increasing the marketing and mass communication. And I know there's a challenge. So I'll say this, the caveat in all of this is my understanding there is a challenge in terms of, because these vaccines are so sensitive, I'll just say that, in terms of, temperature and different things like that, and also supply. So that vaccination site might not have information or privy to that information in terms of when they're getting it, the number of vaccines. I was told maybe they might only have a week leeway time. So again, I don't know the validity of that, but that's what someone had said to me as well.
That's what I've heard too. And what I've heard is the goal in Michigan is to increase that to a 2-week lead time. And I'm not sure how close they are at this point, but that is the goal.
Okay.
And there's only one vaccine that has ultra low temperature storage requirements. The other one doesn't. And then those that are coming down the pike don't have those requirements. They have the same requirements as any other vaccine, it's generally refrigeration. So if you have a refrigerator there, you're probably okay. But if you're going to give all the vaccine on that day, then you don't even need the refrigerator. But you do need some place to store it. And if in the local public health agency can help you with the storage guidance for, and also, handling of the vaccine.
Yeah. So Greg Oliver Sr. is saying I received. He said he received his second Moderna dose this past Saturday. How safe am I today? What I would say, Mr. Greg, is still critically important, because we want to make sure, we have to be vigilant. And I think both Ed and Sandra will agree, is that it's still critically important that you wear your mask, that you practice social distancing, and that you wash your hands as frequently as possible, that you keep your environment as sterile as possible, and just be vigilant and conscious about how you move and what you do. Because here's the deal. The reality is that these vaccines are preventative. It's not a cure. It's preventative. And so we want to make sure that we are still doing everything that we need to do, as the science would say, until we get as many people vaccinated as possible. So I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
Well, it's not only Oliver's safety, but safety of everyone around him. And so, again, as you said, wear your mask, social distance, and because I don't think there's a good handle yet on, somebody may be vaccinated, but they still may harbor some of the virus, and could still pass it along. So again, until we have mass vaccinations and with, as I state, herd immunity, take all the precautions you can.
Right. Yeah. So CDC does continue to recommend that after vaccination to continue to implement those public health interventions that Cleve and Ed said. So it's very important to continue that. Now, no one has said anything about these variants, these changes in the strain of the virus that's circulating. And that's another reason why you have to continue the public health
Yeah.
interventions.
Yeah. And there was information out with respect to the British variant and the South African variant. And I what I deduce from that and listening and kind of reading through some of the material is that there's serious concern with respect to the scientific community about these different variants. And so again, that's why it's even more important to be vigilant and keep doing what we need to do so we can all feel comfortable. It will be inequitable if some of us only feel comfortable and then a large portion of folks don't feel comfortable in going out to socially, and that's not healthy either. So Leonard Love, and we're going to wrap it up. He says he knows of a few people that are ready to get the vaccines, but knowing the difference in them is the question that I guess that they have. So they're ready to get it, but really kind of trying to understand, what's the difference in both of these vaccines, I guess, is where they're stuck with. And should we get stuck there? Should people get stuck there?
No, you shouldn't be stuck there. What I would say again is that their formulations are similar, and their efficacy and safety are similar, and they're equivalent vaccines. The two that we have approved already under the FDA emergency use authorization. Now, the other ones that are coming down the pike they've been, they're made a little differently, and yeah, but they do work. Like the Janssen vaccine, which we'll hear about tomorrow from the FDA advisory committee, does work. And again, it has a 72% efficacy in the United States against symptoms of our disease. And then it prevents hospitalization and death, and 100% prevention of death. So it works quite well. And as Ed said, as you compare that to influenza, if there's not a good match between the vaccine and the influenza viruses that are circulating, then you might get 50% protection instead of more than that. So so we'll hear more about the J&J or the Janssen vaccine tomorrow and over the weekend, and hopefully they'll be available next week.
Yeah, I the Pamela Davison Duck has a question, and she asked, do any of these vaccines contain heavy metals? We talked about the ingredients a little, Pamela. And as far as what I've seen is I have not seen any indication that the ingredients include any heavy metals. What I've seen again is lipids or fats. And then I think some different salines ingredients and sort of, but I haven't seen anywhere. But again, this information, I would direct you to the CDC's website. And also, I think if you're here in Grand Rapids or anywhere, your local health department website would have information on that as well. But we'll be distributing this vaccine resource guide this week to community. It has a lot of great information in there with respect to that. I think we'll leave that one there.
I just want to add that the FDA does also have information about the formulation of the vaccines. And but CDC does have it, I think, to the public in a way that you can access it quickly.
So David Thompson asks, it's my understanding that the CDC does not yet know how long, and this has come up as well, the vaccine protection lasts, right? Do you think the CDC will have a better understanding when it comes to the length of protection in the next 24 months?
Absolutely.
You'll have 24 months
The
data.
trials are continuing for 2 years. Absolutely. They will know more about safety,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll hopefully know more about the duration of antibody, or, yeah, antibody as a measure of the immune response
Mm-hmm.
and how long that lasts.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, that's I think again, um, the research is still coming out, and it will continue to get better and better. What is the benefit? Michael Booker asked, what is the benefit of taking the Johnson and Johnson vaccine as compared to the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine? Well, I will say, as far as what I know, I'm not a scientist or medical physician at all, or medical practitioner at all, but I do know, I believe the Johnson and Johnson, and you guys can correct me if I'm not right, is one dose, one shot, and the other piece I think which we have to lift up is that in terms of efficacy, is what they're saying is it has a 66 or high 60% rate in terms of efficacy or effectiveness. You guys want to add anything to that?
You're absolutely right that the two that are licensed now require 2 doses for that very high vaccine efficacy. At nearly everybody is protected based on the trials.
Mm-hmm.
For the Janssen, the J&J vaccine, or the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, it's 72% protected against symptoms of the COVID-19 disease, but it's even higher in preventing hospitalization, and is 100% effective in preventing death. So, people should understand that that's what you want to prevent. You want to prevent severe disease,
Right.
hospitalization, and death, and that's very important. Uh, and the other distinction is that it's a single dose vaccine, right? As you
Right.
said, Clee. So some people may feel like they want protection immediately. But we'll see, because whatever is available, this is another option. And we have a number of different flu vaccines. So this is wonderful that we'll have a number of different COVID-19 vaccines as well.
Yeah, I think no, that's good. Shirley Moody, she's indicated that her husband has had both of his shots, but it seems like she has not had neither of the shots to this point. So I think she's just kind of making a statement and probably asking why. I would say, Shirley, New Hope Baptist Church, I know they are hosting vaccine clinics. I'm not sure how often those are or when, but I do know that the office of the church is staffed, and so I would highly recommend that you call New Hope. As well, there is a vaccination clinic at DeVos Place downtown, and so you can reach out to the county health department to find out what that schedule looks like. And then we have, and I think this will be the last question, we have how many variants or strands of COVID does the Johnson and Johnson vaccine cover you for? I honestly think that's the jury's still out on that. I think, and unless Sandra or Ed, differently, I know. I want to say maybe this was about a month ago. Dr. Fauci, someone asked that question, and at that time, he said that he said they think I'll just say that these vaccines, the current vaccines, are effective, but they're not totally sure. Or he said they're confident, but not totally 100% sure.
Okay. What we've also heard is that the Janssen vaccine was also tested in South Africa, and some believe that that because the South African strain is different than the strains that were circulating in the U.S., they know for a fact that it does protect against that South African strain, and that's where you get the 66% vaccine efficacy. So that is known. Yeah, so we'll hear more about that tomorrow at the advisory committee meeting for the FDA about the South African strain, because Dr. Fauci also indicated that that's the strain that he's most concerned about.
Right, he did.
Yeah, and he also said that the laboratory studies that are being done to see whether the current vaccines are that are likely to protect against the South African strain or variant. In the lab, it did look like it's likely to protect, but it wasn't as robust, if you put it that way. It's another way of saying that. So he's most concerned, Dr. Fauci is most concerned about the South African. And he says that the Brazilian variant is similar to the South African variant, and that the UK variant of the vaccine are likely to protect against. But they're all studying them, and then they're also the manufacturers are looking for ways to make a vaccine that can protect against the other variants as well.
Yeah.
And if we need a booster, we'll need a booster dose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what I said at one of our earlier guests, Dr. Stoddard from Rose College. She said that it could be definitely a possibility, a strong possibility that there would have to be a booster that's added. This is the last question, and it's more of, I guess, it's kind of conversation that's starting to happen in community, right? About the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, specifically the level of efficacy. And so there's talk about that vaccine in particular will probably be targeted at the African American community and other communities of color. And how do you are you hearing any of that? And is that a concern? And you know where it's coming from, and it's rightfully so. It's the mistrust. And when you look at the Tuskegee study, which lasted for 40 years and was horrific in itself. So where concerns like that come from, and not only Tuskegee, but just a variety of different things that happen with respect to medicine and research and science in more recent days. So.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but again, I stated it earlier, and I'll just say again, people should not get hung up on the percentages of efficacy. I mean, they all work, and as Dr. Hutchins said, they're 100% effective at preventing death, and that's really what's important here, and keeping you out of the hospital. So I knew as soon as I saw those percentages that people were going to be concerned, but again, it's within the margin of margin of error, and they work.
Yeah, but I want to be transparent here as well with that ad, though. You can understand the concern, right? You can appreciate the concern because, especially when we're predominantly this information are, and as I stated earlier, you know, we're doing these live streams to make sure we get as much information out to community as possible, right? And so when I say community, specifically, we're laser focused on the Black community and other communities of color. And so those are real legitimate concerns when it comes to the efficacy, because, you know, quite honest, sometimes we know how the game is played. Oftentimes the playing field looks like this, right? It's not like this. And that's just the nature of the beast. And so we have to be very conscious, because again, when it comes to, and that's the very reason why health disparities exist. That is the very reason, because some of the levels and types of care, access to research trials and other things, oftentimes were overlooked. And so I think that's a real concern, and I think it seems like it's becoming a fear almost, because of some of the nature of the beast. I will say that. So yeah. So,
it is a real concern, as you pointed out, Cleve. But
yeah.
again, knowing what I know about the immune response, if you have even 70%, what that means, what does that mean? Is the probability that 70% of the people will have adequate immunity that will protect them. But if they're exposed to the virus that's circulating, your immune response will be stimulated again. Okay. And that's what we call like a response that would happen within hours instead of days. And when it happens within hours, you're likely to be protected.
Yeah.
So again, getting hung up on the percentages is leads you in a wrong direction. And the key is to get everybody vaccinated with vaccines that are available, so that we can decrease the amount of virus that's circulating in the community and being spread from person to person, so we can get back to some level of normalcy.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very dynamic conversation again. I want to thank both Sonja and Ed for coming on tonight and spending time with us. Remember to check our website out at naacpgr.com. Somebody had asked if this is being recorded. We invite you actually to go back and watch these live streams. They're on our website. All of the ones we've had to date are on there, as well as on our, we started streaming on our YouTube channel last week, I believe. And so if you have any questions, need any additional information, again, you can always visit our website and or send us an email to info@naacpgr.com. And we will host these live streams every week, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Until we feel that it is, we've flooded the community with enough information. And so we thank you all for joining us this evening, and we wish you a great evening. And as I always say, stay safe, wear a mask, wash your hands, and continue to practice social distancing as best as possible. And so thank you, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for the opportunity again.